3 people on a casual walk in southeastern France felt a faint breath of air escaping from what looked like solid rock. Not a breeze, not wind. A whisper, the kind of thing most people would feel against their skin, dismiss as their imagination, and keep walking past. These 3 didn't keep walking. They stopped, traced the air current to a crack in the limestone cliff, too narrow to comfortably squeeze through, and on the other side, sealed by a rockfall undisturbed for roughly 30,000 years, sat one of the most important discoveries in the history of archaeology. What was painted on the walls inside didn't just shock the researchers who eventually arrived, it demolished a theory the entire field had treated as settled for 3 decades, forcing a complete rethink of what humans were capable of tens of thousands of years earlier than anyone had assumed. The year was 1994. The place was a limestone cliff above the Ardèche River gorges in southeastern France. The 3 who found the cave, Jean-Marie Chauvet, Eliette Brunel, and Christian Hilaire, were amateur cavers, hobbyists exploring the gorges purely for the pleasure of it. None were geologists or archaeologists, and none carried specialized equipment. What they had was curiosity enough to follow a faint current of air through a crack in the rock, and the presence of mind to recognize that whatever lay on the other side might matter to the wider world. The cave had stayed sealed for a specific reason that scientists later pieced together through years of study. A massive rockfall, likely triggered by natural erosion of the cliff face, had collapsed across the only entrance at some point in prehistory. Scientists now understand the timing of that collapse with considerable precision. More than 250 radiocarbon samples were taken from charcoal deposits, torch marks on the walls, and animal bones scattered across the floor. That data showed 2 separate groups of prehistoric people had visited and painted inside the cave. The first between roughly 37,000 and 3,500 years ago, the second between about 31,000 and 28,000 years ago. An initial rockfall appears to have partially blocked the entrance near the end of the earlier period, with further collapses sealing it completely sometime after the second group left. After those final collapses, nothing larger than an insect could get in. The cave was locked. What that seal preserved was extraordinary. No rain reached the painted walls, no wind wore away the pigment, no animals tracked mud through the passages or disturbed the sediment, no moisture swings cracked the rock. The internal temperature held steady decade after decade, century after century, millennium after millennium, while ice ages and climate shifts played out on the surface just above the cave's ceiling. The conditions amounted to about as close to a perfect natural preservation environment as exists on Earth. Everything the cave held when the last prehistoric visitor departed was still there, essentially undisturbed, when Chauvet, Brunel, and Hilaire pushed through that crack in 1994. Once researchers began mapping the interior, they found a system considerably larger and more complex than the entrance suggested. 6 connected chambers spread across roughly 400 meters of rock, holding more than 1,000 images between paintings and engravings cut directly into the stone. The range of species depicted was itself immediately unusual. Most Ice Age cave art from this period, across sites worldwide, is dominated by the large herbivores that made up the primary prey of the people who created it: horses, bison, aurochs, deer. That's the pattern researchers had come to expect. Chauvet's walls broke it. The cave is decorated with an unusually high proportion of predators: cave lions, cave bears, hyenas, a leopard, a panther, and an image that appears to be a spotted owl. These animals almost never appear in cave art from this period at other sites. Why the artists at Chauvet chose to cover their walls with the creatures that threatened them rather than the ones they hunted remains a genuinely open question, one that hints at how these people related to their environment and organized their inner world, even if its precise meaning is still being worked out. The cave floor added its own layer of preserved information. Soft clay throughout the chambers still held the paw prints of cave bears that had used the space long before any human arrived to paint, along with wide, shallow depressions marking spots where those bears had curled up to sleep. Fossilized bones lay scattered everywhere, including skulls and the curved horns of an ibex. One section of floor held something particularly striking: a set of child's footprints, accompanied by what looks like the tracks of a dog or wolf running alongside, pressed into the clay more than 25,000 years ago and completely undisturbed since. The child's path through the cave can be traced in detail: where they paused, where they turned, how far they ventured into the darkness before heading back, all of it frozen in clay, untouched for tens of thousands of years. The paintings themselves were what overturned 3 decades of accepted academic thinking. The theory that had dominated the study of prehistoric art since the mid-20th century came from French researcher André Leroy-Gourhan, who published a major study in 1965, laying out a model of how cave art evolved over time. His core argument was that art progressed along a traceable sequence. Early work was simple and crude, and over thousands of years, technique gradually improved until images grew more sophisticated. By that logic, a piece's complexity could serve as a rough proxy for its age. Simpler meant older, more advanced meant more recent. The framework held broad acceptance across the field for 30 years, rarely challenged in any serious way. Chauvet dismantled it. The paintings inside weren't simple outlines or crude scratches or flat single-color shapes. Whoever made them had scraped the rock surface clean before painting, stripping away weathered material to expose a pale, fresh layer of stone that made the pigment stand out with far more clarity. They used shading and layering to suggest the three-dimensional form of muscle beneath a hide. They incorporated the rock's natural contours, its bumps, ridges, and hollows, directly into the composition, letting the physical surface add volume that flat drawing alone couldn't achieve. In some panels, artists gave a single animal extra legs, or second head, set slightly off from the first, so that under the flickering, shifting light of a torch the figure would appear to move. None of this was accidental. It was deliberate technique. These people understood how moving light interacted with their images, and used that understanding to produce something closer to animation than static drawing. None of it matched the picture of primitive early humans slowly figuring out how to draw. This looked like the work of people already carrying a fully developed artistic tradition, with techniques refined and passed down across generations, applied with confidence at a scale and sophistication nothing in the accepted timeline said should have existed this early. Chauvet's art wasn't at the start of a long road towards skill. It was already skilled, and that forced every researcher who examined it closely to confront an uncomfortable question. If this is what human art looked like 36,000 years ago, what does that tell us about human beings at that point in history that we hadn't previously grasped? The radiocarbon dating that pinned down the painting's age was painstaking, taking years to complete properly. Researchers extracted tiny samples from the charcoal in the black drawings and from torch marks on the walls, testing each independently. By the early 2010s, more than 80 separate radiocarbon dates had been collected from the site. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2012 confirmed the paintings dated to the Ornation period between roughly 30,000 and 32,000 years ago, drawing partly on rock slide analysis near the entrance. Later work pushed some of the oldest images further back still. The earliest black drawings at Chauvet are now dated to around 36,000 years ago, placing them among the earliest confirmed examples of figurative art found anywhere on Earth. That figure puts Chauvet thousands of years older than Lascaux, the central French cave that had previously held the title of oldest known major site of ancient cave painting. The handprints scattered through the cave add a dimension many researchers found unexpectedly moving. Some are positive prints, a hand coated in paint and pressed against the stone. Others are negative prints, a hand held flat against the wall while paint was blown around it, leaving fingers and palm outlined as a pale shape against darker background. Both types show up across multiple chambers. Looking closely at these prints, researchers found something that collapses the abstract distance of 30,000 years into something far more personal. One specific individual, identifiable by a slightly bent or crooked pinky finger, left handprints in several separate locations throughout the cave. That single person's path through Chauvet's passages can be traced, where they stopped, which walls they chose, how far into the darkness they went, all recoverable from the shape of one finger pressed into pigment and left on limestone for 30,000 years. The evidence about how the cave was used points strongly toward a site with specific ritual or ceremonial significance rather than an ordinary living space. There's no buildup of the domestic debris that long-term habitation sites reliably leave behind. No middens, no clearly established, repeatedly used cooking areas, no signs of sustained daily life. People came to this cave to paint. That appears to have been the purpose of the visit. Whatever drew them deep into the darkness, far from any natural light. To cover these walls, it wasn't ordinary daily activity. The search for comparable sites across the Ardèche region expanded once Chauvet proved that advanced art from this era was real and documentable. Starting in 2008, research teams extended their survey work to other rock art sites along the Ardèche Gorge, coordinated by researcher Julien Mani. Two sites in particular drew close attention, Baume-la-Trône and Ulen Cave, both showing drawing styles with clear similarities to Chauvet's work, suggesting the cultural tradition behind the cave's paintings wasn't confined to a single location, but was shared across a connected network of communities living in the region during the same period. The broader research effort to understand the full pattern of Ice Age art across this part of France has come to position Chauvet not as an anomaly, but as the most spectacular surviving example of a regional artistic culture that was more widespread and interconnected than anyone had previously realized. The decision about public access was made quickly and decisively, informed directly by the painful lesson of Lascaux. That cave, discovered in 1940 and opened to the public in 1948, drew over 1,000 tourists a day for years before researchers understood what the human presence was doing to the environment inside. Body heat raised the temperature. Carbon dioxide from thousands of people breathing altered the air chemistry. Lighting fixtures introduced photosynthetic organisms that had never existed in the cave before. Mold spread. Green algae colonized the painted walls. The damage accumulated over 15 years of public access proved irreversible. Lascaux was closed to visitors in 1963, and a replica was built nearby to satisfy public interest. The original has never fully recovered. French authorities applied that lesson to Chauvet without hesitation. The cave was closed to public access almost immediately after the discovery was confirmed genuine. Only a small number of researchers are allowed inside each year, working under strict protocols that limit their time inside, control the equipment they bring, and require them to move on elevated platforms to avoid compressing the floor sediment. Even a researcher's breath is treated as a risk to be managed. The temperature and humidity inside Chauvet remain essentially unchanged from when the cave was still sealed. A full-scale replica, the Caverne du Pont d'Arc, opened nearby in 2015, reproducing the chambers and paintings in painstaking detail so the public can experience the site without endangering the original. The real cave is locked, and it will stay locked. Several questions researchers have worked on since the discovery remain unresolved. The two groups, separated by roughly 5,000 years, who both painted inside Chauvet, raise a question no amount of radiocarbon dating can settle. Did the second group, arriving long after the first, know what they were walking into? Did they understand they were building on the work of people who came before them? Or did they arrive unaware of the earlier paintings and simply find, independently, a place their predecessors had also been drawn to? Whether the two groups were linked by some continuous cultural tradition or found the same cave separately across 5,000 years is a question the physical evidence alone can't answer. The composite figure in the cave's deepest chamber, a form blending human and animal features in a way that resists any straightforward reading, continues to fuel serious academic debate. It's one of the oldest known examples anywhere in the world of imagery mixing human and animal traits, and what it meant to the people who made it remains genuinely uncertain. Some researchers argue for a spiritual or ceremonial reading. Others see narrative imagery, a story encoded visually. The honest answer is that modern minds are working across an enormous cultural distance from the people who made it, and the precise meaning may be permanently out of reach. What isn't uncertain is the significance of what three people found by following a breath of air through a crack in a cliff in 1994. A sealed pocket of the Ice Age, preserved by accident, containing proof that humans were already producing art of extraordinary sophistication tens of thousands of years before the prevailing theory said they should have been capable of it. The paintings at Chauvet don't show the beginning of human creativity. They show it already mature, already accomplished, already commanding techniques of shading, perspective, motion, and composition that 20th century researchers assume took tens of thousands more years to develop. Whatever that means for when fully modern human cognitive and creative capacity actually emerged. The answer is earlier than anyone believed before 1994. And the next detail pulled from those walls may push it back further still. Let's go deeper on several parts of this story because the detail beneath the headline reveals things about both the cave and about early humans that deserve more than a quick summary. Start with the physical mechanics of why the cave preserved so well. The limestone geology of the Ardèche region made this kind of preservation possible in the first place. Limestone is a sedimentary rock formed from ancient marine deposits, and unlike granite or basalt, it isn't fully solid. It contains tiny pores and channels through which water moves very slowly. That micropermeability means limestone cave systems tend to hold very stable internal humidity over long periods, because moisture moves through the rock in a way that prevents dramatic swings in either direction. The cave wasn't dry. The preservation wasn't the result of desert-like aridity. Conditions were consistently damp but stable, exactly what pigments need to survive across geological time spans without drying out and flaking or dissolving in pooled water. The pigments themselves also contributed to their own survival. Chauvet's black drawings are made primarily from charcoal and manganese dioxide, both chemically stable over long periods under the right conditions, and neither reacts readily with the limestone surface or with trace gases in cave air. The red and ochre tones elsewhere come from iron oxide compounds, specifically hematite and ochre, similarly stable. The artists weren't working with materials destined to fade quickly, even outdoors. Put those materials on limestone walls inside a sealed cave with stable humidity and temperature, and you get something that can last, essentially, indefinitely. The torch marks scattered throughout the cave are worth examining closely because they reveal how the artists worked and how much time they spent inside. Many appear as black smears or deposits on the ceiling and upper walls, left by pine torches or torches made from twisted plant fiber held up for light. In some sections, multiple layers of torch marks are visible, showing people return to the same spot across more than one visit. The marks also help map the routes people took through the cave. They don't appear randomly, but cluster along travel paths, and in chambers where people stop to work or rest. By mapping those marks alongside the floor's footprints, researchers have reconstructed something close to a map of how different individuals moved through the system on different visits, which chambers saw the heaviest use, and where artists spent the most time. The techniques used in the paintings have drawn intense study precisely because they're so much more advanced than the old theory predicted. One technique that stands out is what researchers call the scraping method. Before painting an animal, the artist first used a stone tool to scrape away the darkened outer surface of the limestone, removing a layer of built-up calcite deposit and rock. The freshly scraped surface came out pale and clean, giving a high contrast background that made painted lines stand out far more sharply than they would against naturally dark, weathered stone. That preparation step required forethought. The artist couldn't simply pick up pigment and start drawing. They had to prepare the surface first, which implies planning ahead, holding a mental image of the finished piece before a single mark was made, and understanding how the background's color and texture would shape the final result. Using the rock's natural features as part of the composition shows equally deliberate intent. Many of Chauvet's animals are positioned so a natural bulge or hollow in the surface becomes part of the image. A bulge becomes the shoulder of a horse. A crack becomes the line between two bison. These aren't accidents or simplifications. They're compositional choices, requiring the artist to look at raw limestone and see the shapes waiting to be pulled out of it. It's exactly the kind of spatial and aesthetic thinking people sometimes assume took centuries of artistic development to cultivate. The artists at Chauvet were already doing it 36,000 years ago. The multi-limb technique used to suggest motion is perhaps the most striking element in the cave. In several panels, animals appear with more legs than they actually have, or with heads shown in slightly different positions within the same image. Under steady light, these panels look like overlapping images. Under a flickering torch, the effect changes completely. The animal appears to move, legs cycling, the head turning. What looks cluttered in steady light becomes animation in flickering light, and the artists clearly knew it would. They weren't painting for modern visitors under electric light in a replica. They were painting for an audience that would experience the images by torchlight, and they designed accordingly. The two separate groups who painted in Chauvet also raise an interesting question about continuity of tradition. If the second group arrived roughly 5,000 years after the first, did they inherit the same techniques? Did they learn from people who'd learned from people who'd eventually traced their training back to the original artists? 5,000 years is an enormous span for any oral or practical tradition to survive intact. Yet the stylistic similarities between the earlier and later paintings, identified through careful analysis of the charcoal composition and drawing methods each group used, suggest that whatever separated the two groups in time, they shared a closely related artistic tradition. Methods didn't shift dramatically across that gap, meaning the tradition was robust and central enough to whatever culture these people belonged to that it survived across many generations without significant loss. The discovery of comparable art styles at nearby Ardèche Gorge sites strengthens this picture considerably. Chauvet Cave and other sites dated to the same general period show drawing techniques and species choices that align closely with what's found at Chauvet. That regional consistency tells researchers Chauvet wasn't a single isolated phenomenon produced by one exceptionally gifted individual or community. It was part of a broader cultural pattern spanning communities living in the region at the same time, connected in ways that let artistic traditions spread and persist. Whether that connection came through trade, seasonal migration, intermarriage between communities, or some other form of regular contact isn't clear. What is clear is that the sophisticated artistic culture on display at Chauvet was shared across a far wider network than anyone initially realized. The implications for how we understand early modern humans extend well beyond cave art alone. The cognitive abilities required to produce what's on Chauvet's walls aren't trivial. Planning a composition around a scraped, prepared surface requires working memory and the capacity to hold a mental image of the finished result while carrying out the physical preparation. Using the rock's natural contours as compositional elements requires genuine visual spatial reasoning